Welcome to The Art of Growth. I'm Joel Hubbard.
And I am Jim Zartman, and we have been talking through the instincts, taking a deeper dive into the instincts by talking through different sections of our new book called Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers about the instincts. And for those still adjusting to the terms, when we talk about these terms, classically, they use these developmental or evolutionary terms like self-preservation, sexual, and social, but those don't really work when you go into groups of people, how we're working together, how we accomplish, and your instincts do not disappear. They do not suddenly become non-part of the equation. So we're talking about what happens when we are with other people and these instincts come into play, and that's why we use these terms. So the hunter pairs up well with the concept of the sexual instinct, the farmer with the preservational instinct, and the teamer with the social instinct. And today we want to talk through this idea around what happens when they collide, when there's conflict between the different instincts, when their value systems are actually at odds. And we see this all the time. This is something that often organizations want us to help them through, is around conflict, communication, things like that. So Joel, as we jump into what's this idea around the instincts colliding into each other, they coming into conflict with each other.
I think it's probably best to say that they are always in conflict with each other. I don't think that there's ever a time where 2, 3, 4, or 5 people are doing any kind of project together, doing any kind of work, where that's not going to happen. And that's a problem with the word conflict. It sounds so negative, so dark, so problematic. It's like a big, huge, explosive fight. That's what people think of oftentimes when they think of conflict. And what we mean by conflict is anytime there is a different approach to something, and those different approaches come together, what happens? There's a bit of a collision. But it's not a collision in the sense of a 100-car pileup on a major highway due to ice and snow and all that. It's more of like, oh, I just bumped into you. Little fender bender or a little bump that people experience. And you do that. You experience that all day long. I mean, if you're self-reflective, you're aware of how many times you're interacting with somebody on a work project and there's a little bit of like we bumped in. There's a misalignment. Oh, I didn't know. That's not what I meant by that. Or
we start advocating for a different value.
Yeah. And we don't realize that the values that we have are more innate to us than they are, say, chosen by us at a sort of conscious level. So we think about like if someone is feeling a bit of a push against because someone else is maybe talking about being a bit more conservative with the resources. Like, let's be a little bit more conservative with how we're moving through, spending money, taking new projects on, new, maybe, merging with another organization, all these things that, whoa, slow down.
I feel like putting assets at risk.
Yeah, it's putting assets at risk. So that's where the value system will start to emerge, where people will say, well, that's because I'm fiscally conservative. That's because we need to be responsible with our resources. Meanwhile, the other side is like, boy, these people are just not seeing the big picture and they're not willing to take risks to make the changes. And then the moral evaluations emerge where it's like, you're not with us, you're not on board, you're oppositional, you're just being resistant. There's all sorts of values that we add to what it is that's happening underneath, which is the instinctual drive.
And they're all good.
They're all good, yeah.
Like as you were going through those and saying those, you're naming ones that are of the different instincts, like how the hunters are aware of good value systems of we need to be able to pursue new opportunities. We have to be willing to take risks. We don't want to miss opportunities. Like those are true statements. And the farmers are advocating for good value systems when they're saying we need to conserve our resources. We need to be aware and cautious of how we are utilizing what's before us and how we are managing what is already in front of us, what's entrusted to us, what's at our disposal right now. And the teamers are often advocating for like, how are we working together? Are we considering the different people that are in the room and what they have to offer and how we can actually work together? And so all of these are advocating for good value system. So we said this a while ago, but one of the compliments about the book that I'm most proud of is that we don't hold up one as a greater value than the others.
Right.
We're saying they all belong. And so as we're talking about these conflicts that naturally pop up between each other, and we need to be aware of the ones that we tend to advocate for in that moment, we're saying that all of them are actually good.
Yeah. And the self-awareness is massively important. Like, do you know that you're driven by this instinct?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you have an option. It's not like have
you noticed when you're stressed, what do you start advocating for?
Well, I mean, this is a good pivot point, because what are the causes to these collisions, these instinctual collisions? Well, one is just simply people. When people are together, there's always going to be a conflict of some sort, right?
That's right. Even if there isn't necessarily something wrong, but it's just we come to make a decision, we're coming with different value systems.
Different value, different perspectives, all this stuff is happening. So that's Tuesday for most of us, right? That's just normal, run-of-the-mill kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then what happens when you're feeling threatened? So there's two things in my mind that I want to talk about. One is when you're feeling threatened, or when there's an opportunity that feels like, you can't miss out on this. Yeah. Fear of missing out. It's like, this is important. We're going to miss out on something significant if we don't take advantage of this. And I would include in there trauma as well. So I think there are things to be said about both threats, and threats is the larger category, but underneath that might be something that's trauma related, and to be aware of that, because that comes into the picture too. If you feel like, you've been harmed where you were harmed when you were younger, for people that have had significant trauma, the instincts are not developed to the degree that they would be had that trauma not taken place.
Yeah.
And so you're going to function more at a, fear survival level than maybe you would if you didn't have that experience. So that's to, keep that in mind as well as we're thinking about threats. But generally speaking, when there's an organizational heightened level of anxiety at the organizational level, right, at a team level, at a family level, at a church level, whatever group of people, even playing sports, with teams, if the team's not doing well, you're going to feel the energy shift. There's something off there.
Oh, we just saw that in the Super Bowl this year, didn't we?
Oh my gosh. Great example of that. Yeah.
Yeah. The Eagles and the Chiefs.
Could you read it yourself as a teamer?
You can't help it.
Yeah.
You could see the Chiefs, who have been unbelievably dominant. So they were going for 3 Super Bowl wins in a row, which has never been done. Tom Brady came close. He had an opportunity, but he wasn't able to do it either, even though he had 2 back-to-back. And the Chiefs have had the last 2 back-to-back, and they got smoked.
Yeah.
They couldn't pull it together. They were definitely in their head about it. When something is going wrong, the problem is all of these things get activated simultaneously in different directions, and it's very hard to bring it back together.
Oh, the alignment was impossible. They could not come back. And I thought, okay, halftime, maybe they'll pull it off. But I
thought they would.
You thought they would? Yeah.
I really thought you'd see a different team come out.
Yeah.
Because we've seen that before with the Patriots. Like,
sure.
I know some people hate them. I'm not a sports guy. I have no dog in this fight. But there was one, I saw like some Instagram reel where they were talking about after the fact and I think I saw this game a few years ago where the Patriots were down by 28 going into the second half and then won.
Yes, I remember that.
How do you think that turns around? What do you think fell apart here? What do you think they were able to do that was different?
I think that I wonder if it has to do for it is, but I wonder if it has to do with just how polarized you are in your alignment. Like if you're not aligning, you're really polarized, you're pulling in different directions. That's one that's very difficult to turn around and pivot in midstream. It also depends upon how long that's been going on. Like what was before the game? What happened in advance of that? Was there some kind of tension, some kind of struggle, something going on? Maybe just overconfident, whatever's going on. But oftentimes those deeper ones, you can't pivot those in the middle of a game. But if it's just like, oh, we're not clicking because, I don't know, our timing's off, but in terms of relationally, we're good, then I think those are a bit easier to manage. I don't remember all the specifics of that game, but it did make me think of when I was watching the Chiefs, I thought to myself, I don't think they're coming back in the second half. And it was just, for me, it was just a sense. I had nothing to base that on. But you can see how even alignment around the instincts, if there's enough of a stress factor, enough of a threat, it takes it takes self-awareness, and it takes a lot of deliberate effort to work against your survival instinct. And I wonder if the survival instinct didn't kick in for, say, the Chiefs at the point of where it was like, we're not working well together. So then there's a sort of hunkering down and your vision gets really narrow. I love the way it's been put. David White says something like, the faster you're traveling with a more, the narrower your vision is. And that happens with the instinct when it's being threatened. It's like the focus narrows. So even your secondary instinct, you lose sight of, and you're just driven by that primary one. And so you can see it active. You can see people just like, no, we need to do this, and no, we don't. And then other people just resistant and locking down, and there is no flexibility in the space that's happening in our country right now in the world of politics. I do think that that's a big part of also the instincts. They play a role. Doesn't tell the whole story for sure, but there's instinctual drives based upon our sense of feeling threatened that's causing us to react in certain ways. So I think that is where we are the most prone to coming really blind to the other instincts and then making very poor decisions. And companies that do this, we either go consensus, which just means really doesn't usually mean that the decision's going to do anything punchy. It's usually a weak kind of result when it's just sort of, well, can we all agree and try to push consensus? I've watched leadership do that in the past, and I could see the different instinctual drives pushing for different things.
Yeah.
And in the end, it was sort of like, is there a weak option, option F or Z here that we can go with that is somewhat okay with most of us here? And we'll talk about that later in terms of, I think, the next podcast that we want to do.
Yeah.
But
what instinct is needed now?
What instinct is needed now? But I think that is where then other leaders will take more of I'm making the decision. That's it. We're moving forward. We've talked about this before. There's an organization we've coached where the leader, no matter what we've coached this leader on, driven by the hunter instinct, and companies sinking right now. And it's like, more change is needed. And it becomes erratic. It doesn't become real thoughtful. So they're at odds, and people that normally work well together are at odds with each other. It's very much around the instincts. We're watching that, and it's the narrowing down the vision to like, this is the only thing we should be doing. This is how we're going to get out of the hole we're in. So I think threats, trauma, those things definitely make a big difference into why we get stuck and why they collide and why we can't move forward together.
Well, and this is also something we advocate for in the book, which is like the developing the baseline competence in the different instincts. Is it gives you the ability to not overly rely on one, because if you're relying too much on the one, and like you're saying with the hunter instinct, you start taking bad shots.
Yeah.
You start throwing interceptions. You start just missing your prey altogether when you're taking too many shots. And when you were bringing that up, I had this flashback to this epiphany about several conversations where I have interviewed people and talked to people where their instincts are pretty close. When they've taken our assessment at our website, and if you haven't taken it, theartofgrowth.org, you can take the Hunter Farmer Teamer test. And they've been close. And as you were saying, trauma can make us overly rely on one, and we tend to do that even more. I was going, the people who had the most balance, they seem to have the least amount of trauma. They seem to have like a pretty stable, steady kind of existence where they're able to kind of keep things and pull on different things when they need it. But it's true, when we're in real stress or we're people who have been through a lot, there tends to be that same activation. And you also gave me a flashback to the past games as far as in those two Super Bowls when the Patriots were down. Tom Brady was going over and grabbing guys and telling them, this is what we're going to do. This is what's going to happen. He was yelling. But when I was watching the Chiefs game, Mahomes was sitting back and other guys were coming up trying to encourage him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was like, I wonder if that was one of those big differences in the way it was. The guys were coming over to him. I saw guys that were mic'd up and they were like, Patriots did it. And so immediately you're comparing, you're not doing what I saw in the people who actually pulled it off.
Yeah.
Coming back from a deficit.
Well, and that's the thing you would watch even in the past. I remember times where Brady was getting sacked, where his line wasn't protecting him. And then because of that, your vision narrows and then you're only seeing one target. Right. And a good quarterback is able to move quickly through the options.
Because you're not looking for all your targets. Now you're looking at all the things that are your attackers.
Right. So you're looking for only the one that you can rely on.
Yeah.
So it was like, well, who's my favorite tight end that I will always go to? And even when that tight end has 2 or 3 defenders on him, the quarterback try to force that and make that happen. And so that happens to all of us when we're facing a threat to our perceived survival. And so you think about what happens too with trauma is that you can end up in another instinct trying to live out of that instead of your dominant instinct. And what I say to people is like, it's not that you've swapped instincts.
Right.
What happens is you're taking your dominant instinct and you're trying to make it live inside the world of another instinct. And so then it's not effective.
Like when another context is needed?
No, it's not through wisdom and it's not through forethought. It's more of the way the instincts seem to work because we have all 3 and people will visit at times all 3.
Yeah.
So for example, if you feel like somebody's typically more farmer, self-preservation, and let's say the hunters, they're last, they're third. But suddenly they're feeling like nothing that's working, to protect them and to give them sustenance. To protect them, to give them what they need, to give them the resources. They suddenly become very aggressive, and it surprises people. Like, where did this aggression come from?
Yeah.
Where did this attack? And that will be oftentimes again because you're feeling threatened. But in the case of, say, significant trauma, somebody could end up living in their self-preservation or their farmer instinct, even if they're a teamer. And they can slip into that. I'm watching that with a leader right now who, because they've been thrown into a new role, they're just, living out of the farmer instinct, but it's not done really well. It's sort of just, I gotta live here. And it's like, well, have you considered bringing people with you? And as I'm coaching this person, they're like, and this one's in full burnout. And she was saying, I'm not able to. And I said, okay, how about we take one day every 2 weeks where you have that full day to think about the team and to plan for the team. And she was like, that would be a dream. As her immediate response, I knew she was a teamer. Based on, even if I had any questions, it was like, oh, that would be a dream. Really? Yeah, absolutely. I said, well, my partner Jim, he goes on long bike rides, when it's the right weather, and usually that's when things will start to open up for him. And she was like, oh, 100%. That's how it happens for me too. And so the whole concept around getting out of that instinct, the one that you're trying to live from, because she's had early childhood trauma and all the pressures currently that are hitting her at work. So it's funny how this all works.
Yeah.
Funny, not funny. It's like every situation that we experience in the present harkens back to some kind of experience we had when we were young. And so it's like, well, this is not a safe place to really lean into the fullness of my dominant instinct. So I'm going to bounce to the other one.
Right.
And when that happens, even more collisions happen instinctually. And so meanwhile, her boss is saying to me, she's amazing. I want to keep her because she's so good. But she's not living, and he didn't have the language for it, but he's like, she's not who she is when she's at her best. And
right.
So right now there's a collision happening. So that's I think a lot of it is from the instinct to survive kicks in, and we become narrower in our field of vision, and we push down even harder on either our first instinct or the second, and sometimes a third, and we're not able to read, as back to, sorry folks who are not into sports, but as a quarterback, to read your options, to see that Oh, this one's closed. Go quickly move to the second. Okay, that option's closed. Okay, move to the third, right? That's the whole, remember we talked about the flexibility, the warm, strong in body, warm at heart, flexible in mind. Well, when you're in that place of feeling threatened, feeling stressed, your flexibility goes away. That's one of the first things. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to hear from people. I would love to have some more conversations and hear from people as far as they feel like if early experiences or trauma of some kind has influenced the way they are able to move through these instincts. That would be a really interesting question to explore. We haven't really gotten a chance to explore much yet, but it would be great to be able to do so. It seems to me, I'd see if you agree with this, but it seems to me that the most common conflict instinctually when we see on teams tends to be between the hunters and the farmers.
I would say that seems true, but it also is that I've had conflicts with teamers back in the day when I was pastoring a church. One of my right-hand person was a teamer, and she would be frustrated by me wanting to just move forward with things. And I would say, well, it's like, this is what we should be doing. I have all my values around it. And she would say, yeah, but the people aren't with you and you need to bring them with you. And, all of this teamer stuff that she would throw at me felt like resistance to me, so we would regularly hit points of conflict. And so I want to nuance that to say, yes, hunters and farmers will tend to have that problem for sure, but teamers will have a different kind of problem. The kind of problem that hunters and farmers have, it has to do a lot with speed and change, and so that we're gonna see quite obvious. But where teamers are saying, hey, we need to bring people with us, we need to think about how this is impacting different folks. Hey, have you empowered these people? Why are you not? This was always the feedback I got from the teamer. Why are you not bringing people with you? And I was like, what do you mean bring people with me? In my car? It was like, no, you make decisions and then you move forward. But you're not bringing people with you. You're not like, who should I bring with me to both train, to equip, to mentor, to delegate to? Who are the people that would love to do this thing that you're doing right now? And I would never think of it. Never crossed my mind. What would cross my mind is I want to have everybody involved in whatever hunt I'm going on, because as a hunter first, teamer second, that's more of how I thought about it. Whereas she was thinking about it as, you're not involving enough people. You've got this big idea, this big vision, but you don't know how to involve people. And so that was always the pushback I got. And so it felt like it was slowing things down. Felt like I wasn't able to move as quickly as I wanted to.
Yeah, the picture that comes to mind as you're saying that is there's someone who, the scene in the movie where there's like the lead warrior that they're like, charge, and they just start running.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're hoping everyone like runs behind them and joins them versus the people who hold the line. They're like, let's go. We go together. And then they all run together. Yeah. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it's pacing, rhythm, whatever language we have around the instincts, because they're all very different in terms of pacing and rhythm and all that. But you can tell that there's you're marching at the wrong beat. You're like, why isn't, like I started running and nobody ran with me.
Yeah.
Charge. And then I'm running. It's like, yeah, I'm on my own. I guess I'm on my own here. Like, well, this feels terrible. So I go back and what did I miss? Well, you missed something, right? Whereas the teamer's like, I'm reading that pretty well. And I knew that the people weren't ready. And, we needed to get them on board. We needed to get them excited, passionate, seeing and understanding the vision.
I would say as a teamer, I'm very aware of the necessary pace. So what the pace should be. And so there's some times where I'm like, whoa, slow it down. That's a little too fast. And then there's other times where I do get frustrated where I'm like, you guys, we got to speed up or we're going to get lost. I've felt the frustration from both tempos.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because sometimes it's like, we've got to stay up. We're falling behind.
Yeah.
Like, and if we stay at this pace, we're going to get lost and we're going to run out of resources, whatever. There's like the awareness of that. And there's other times where it's just kind of like, we are so far ahead of the game. We're going to be strung in a thin line. We're going to be spread out, and then we're going to be easy to take out because you got people that are going way too fast and no one's going to be able to keep up. I've definitely experienced the frustration on both ends of that.
Yeah, I bet that shows up quite a bit in music as well, in terms of, leading a band.
I love click tracks. Like, it was interesting. This was something that happened recently. Some musicians started giving the audio feed that they get on stage and sharing that, and people were like flipping out, like, that's what you're hearing, because they were thinking, oh, what the people on stage are hearing, they're hearing all the musicians in the crowd, and the loudest thing you're hearing is this in your ear that's going, and then you're hearing a couple other things and yourself, and then maybe a little bit of the crowd, but what you're hearing is not what would be enjoyable to listen to, like by most people. You're hearing the thing that is keeping the room together. You're not hearing the room together.
Well, that's fascinating. That's a great illustration. So that's one of the things that then the teamer is probably hearing. What's the underlying click track or the necessary click track to keep us together? What's the underlying thing that's keeping us either together or separating us? That's what comes through the music.
Because we're talking about when instincts collide and they have conflict. So, and one of the things that happens is people do get spread too thin. They start to separate. They're not moving together. And one of the solutions we see this, especially in larger companies, that's when they get incredibly siloed. They therefore aren't working together. And we've seen this in one organization. They're always complaining at the other silo isn't giving them what they need so that they can go at the pace they need to go. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that when you have this breakdown of the instincts are having this collision, they're having this conflict, and because they're advocating for different things, they end up siloing and becoming kind of these own departments. And then you can sort of blame the other one for your lack of movement.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we've seen. So in a smaller team, it tends to be a little bit more intense a lot of times, but they have those conflicts. They're able to move through them. That's why I heard a stat recently that the greatest job satisfaction are in companies of between 6 and 12 people. Mm-hmm. So when they get too big, it actually becomes real frustration because you run into these things. And then at a certain size, you have a lot more of that conflict because you're trying to figure out kind of what are we supposed to be and how are we supposed to move? And so a lot of times on those smaller teams, you tend to have these intense conflicts come up, but you're forced to move through them because you have to interact every day. You don't have the opportunity to silo. Mm-hmm. We're talking about how to do this, but again, we've said on the podcast, we are very general. And so much in the coaching is when we have to get specific because your context is really going to depend on like the size of your organization, your church, your family unit, even when you're trying to navigate these different value systems.
Yeah. How do we move through conflict? What are the ways maybe some steps or some key ingredients to moving through it? And again, this is not the avoidance. How do we avoid conflict, Jim? How do we not have conflict? That's the question that a lot of times we ask ourselves rather than, no, conflict is going to happen, but how do we keep it from becoming a war? As one philosopher said, the difference between the two, there is a difference between war and conflict. And, it's when
war is the inability to deal with conflict.
Right.
Yeah, that's the Peter Rollins phrase. War is not conflict, it's the inability to deal with it.
Yeah. And which causes then things to be what people then interpret as conflict is we had a war. Yeah. That was...
because there was winners and losers.
That's right. It's a win-loss, zero-sum game. Yeah.
Instead of, it's interesting that the jiu-jitsu guys often quote that, I think it's a proverb or something about, as iron sharpens iron, one sharpens the other. And what we're talking about productive conflict is like there is this rubbing against each other, but the purpose is for the sharpening of both so that it's supposed to be a win-win. Productive conflict is a win-win. The inability to deal with conflict is win-lose.
Yeah, that's well said. So let's talk about how do we do that then? How do we do conflict in a way that produces this sharpening, this good for all? What are some ingredients?
Yeah, it's amazing how many times I've sat with like a couple and I'll ask them this question: can you name what your partner is advocating for right now? And how many people struggle to do that? That they can name the value that the other is appealing to.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were talking about this at the beginning, that often when there's a conflict, you have equally valid and good things, good values that people are advocating for. And this is a huge conversation right now, not just strengths, but like my values. What are my values?
Yeah.
And understanding your values. But what do you do when your values are in conflict for another?
Yeah.
And so that's a huge component. Can you even name what the other person is advocating for? Because if you could name it, you're actually going to see that there's something good there.
We were on a podcast yesterday. Shout out to Around the Circle.
Around the
Awesome
Circle.
People.
Love them.
Yeah. And one of the things that Jeff Cook, who's the one interviewing us, said about language is that it helps us to even think differently when we have different language for things. I also am a big fan of how language can help us. You know, even naming an emotion suddenly gives you more access to that emotion. So especially if you're kind of blind to it, it's not your strength to process emotion. Well,
and everyone else sees it affecting you, but you don't know how to name it.
You don't know what that is, which is why you designed the circle,
the feelings wheel.
The feelings wheel. It's just powerful because people then are able to access that experience, that feeling inside themselves, and so language is enormously helpful around this topic of conflict. And what is the instinct that I'm naturally blind to? How do I see it in myself a little bit more? And how do I see it in other people so that I can understand that there's a value system around that, so that I can name the value system the other person has? And that, goes to what you were talking about, which of course it makes people feel seen. People feel understood. People feel like they're not just being ignored in just, utility. So how do we do that? And I think part of it is the language that we've put in the book. That's a big thing. For me, it's been massively helpful.
Yeah, speaking the language of the other instinct.
Yeah. To feel like, what does sustainability feel like? Because it's not a word that I would gravitate towards, because it's the one that's more repressed in me. So when I began to hear that word used to speak about how do we make our, products that are more sustainable, or how do we help the planet be sustainable? How do we do things that really are good for the environment? And so there's all sorts of language around sustainability that's not intuitive to me at all. But learning it and then understanding what is meant by that from the head center perspective, like curious about that, but then also tuning inwardly to access what does that experience at the body level feel like? Sustainability, it's the sense that I have in my body when I say sustainability. How about predictability? What does that do for me, and how do I feel that? Can I access that internally? And then when I'm meeting with farmers, I can both feel the instinct's rhythm and pace. Those words are helpful to get me there, and then have conversation with them, actually hear those words when they're spoken. When a farmer type or a teamer type or a hunter type uses a particular set of words and you don't notice it because it isn't your dominant instinct, you can blow right by it and still continue to be talking through your instinctual, language. Like I said this on the podcast yesterday. I think it was my buddy who at the gym, when I purchased a new glove from Amazon.
Oh yeah.
And he immediately was like, "Why didn't you buy it from Jimmy, who buys all the stuff for us?" It was this, could totally hear and feel the teamer instinct. Well, because of that, I was able to hear it differently than the way I would normally hear it as a hunter. Like,
as a challenge to you.
As a challenge to me personally.
Right. You did something wrong.
Like, what did I do? What do you mean? Or, even like
competitive.
As a weak offer.
Right.
It felt like a weak offer to me. Like, why didn't you buy it? Yeah, I could do that. But I like the convenience. I don't care. Completely blind to this coming from a value perspective. Like, this was a deep inherent, I could feel the energy of, why are you being a piece of crap about this? Because it's like you know this. I've told you this before, and this benefits all of us. So I was able to hear it in that with the value around that, and then was able to value it.
But even I told you this before, But yeah, it was a piece of information, but it didn't stick with me because
it's not my.
It didn't stick with the value system that I already hold.
That's right.
And I think a lot of times people are saying, well, I've told you this before.
Yeah.
Well, you told you and it stuck with you and you were advocating for it because it mattered to you. But if it didn't register on my value system, I probably am not going to remember it.
That's right.
This is what happens with a lot of couples.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So they're advocating for a different value system and the other person doesn't remember or it doesn't stick or it doesn't register or they don't do something about it because it's not a shared value. They're advocating for a different value, which, by the way, is often a really good thing about relationships that you can bring these different values to the
100%.
table. But you see the value as competing instead of an addition. And I think
that's really
so
good.
much of conflict is we do the or instead of the and.
Yeah.
The benefit of the different value systems is it adds an and to the equation, but we have a negative conflict experience when we see it as an or.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I felt that the other day when, my wife comes downstairs while I'm on a call with somebody and whispers, could you remember to please put the right cover on the pot? Because I told you this earlier, I took chicken bones and I put it in a big pot and I boil it. And I'm a person of extreme convenience with not any sense of the farmer instinct. So I go and reach in, I grab a cover and it's like too big. And I'm like, whatever, it covers it, right? Yeah. That's the point. So I go downstairs and she comes downstairs and whispers this.
It's not the right cover.
It's not the right cover. I'm like, and literally I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like immediately, all that comes up is like, why in the world would you come downstairs to interrupt my flow, to whisper to me that I need to put the right cover? Like, who cares? Why is that an issue? And then later she goes, because what happens, Joel, is the steam comes out and it goes up and it's steaming up the whole place and you didn't even put the fan on the microwave right above it. So that's going to ruin, and it's like, oh, right, resource management, and because she has much more intuition around resource management, it's immediate to her, whereas not for me, right?
She sees the associated costs with the action.
Right, so I had to practice that. I'm like, all right, good point, right? The feeling internally is it's robbing me of my instinct in some sense, and I think that's a lot of what we feel when the instincts are being threatened by others. It's like, it's taking something from my instinct in some sense. So it feels diminishing. It's like, I don't get as much out of this. This is not as important. This is something that's pushing against my value system or my instinct. And I think that that's when we can really become, resistant and.
If I could say anything to anyone is a lot of times people say, well, our values don't align. There is a time when that can be an issue. But there's also a time when that's a benefit. Yeah. And it takes some wisdom to explore what that is because your gut reaction is to advocate for your value at the expense of the value of the other.
Yeah.
And what a lot of wisdom and interdependent teams need to do is to see the value as a bonus to their value. Man, if we have both of these going, that could be really great.
Yeah.
But the problem is, a lot of times these conversations don't come up until there's some kind of a rubbing into each other or some kind of conflictual situation. And when the conflict arises, then we have the narrowing of the perspective. And then it's really hard because then it does feel like a conflict.
Yeah.
And then you have to go through the self-awareness about regulating your nervous system, de-escalation, openness and curiosity. You have to return to those things or you can self-destruct.
Yeah. Do you know what makes conflict a complete loss?
What?
It's when we don't have that result of coming through it. So let me put it this way. There's the conflict that happens. We see it as either bad, something to be avoided, something not to be dealt with. Or we have it and it's a win-loss kind of proposition.
Yeah.
Or we do conflict, and it's uncomfortable, and we make mistakes, and we value ours above someone else's, and then we go through this like rubbing and pushing against and conflict, and then not all in the same meeting, but maybe a week later, hopefully it's not too long after that, you come back together, and you say, hey, you know what? I ran over your value system. I didn't listen to it. I didn't hear it. I resisted it. But I gave it more thought. And you know what? I really appreciate your contribution. I see now what you were trying to push for. Let me see if I got that, if I'm getting it right. It sounded like you were pushing for this. And you get alignment around that in the agreement, and the other person's, gets, yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's what was going on. Okay, so how can we move forward together? What's a way that we can get through this so that it benefits all of us, right? How do we do that? And then the wisdom emerges. You have a solution, and that is what makes the conflict a win. It's not that you had it, but it's how you move through it.
Right.
And I'm not saying, again, you get it, you nail it, because there's no such thing as like every single time you meet with people or you're having some kind of conversation or conflict, it's not like you're going to go through it and every single time, oh, right, so your value system is this. Got it. Oh, this is wonderful. Okay. And every meeting ends that way. And you're batting 1,000. That is not going to happen for the most part. Occasionally, rarely, you might get it that way. But what makes it really good, the conflict and not a complete loss, is when you go through that process of, right, so now that I can breathe a little bit, calm my nervous system down. That's a big, huge thing. Breathe, calm the nervous system down. I have the language now of these other instincts. What was I hearing? What were they saying? You go back. Is this what you were saying? Is this what was going on? Okay, now we understand. How can we move forward together? How can we get the best of all three of our instincts to work? And then what happens is the conflict that was the wound then becomes such a powerful healing, and really, like, now you've got alignment. Now you've got wholehearted engagement because people felt seen, heard, and understood. But you didn't just give in. It wasn't like a weak kind of option. It was, we bumped up. We advocated for our instincts because I think it's important. Because you might be right. Your instinct might be right in this situation. You don't know. But it's that ability to work through the nervous system to get to that place of deeper understanding and then wisdom on how to move forward.
There's something that I think we do that is pretty ineffective in American corporate culture. So we are a highly individual culture. And because of this, we tend to focus on individual reviews. So this is something that every company does. They do 360 reviews. They do individual reviews every year. But I don't know very many that do team reviews.
Mm-hmm.
So many companies don't do what you were just advocating for, which is like to take a look at what just happened and learn from it. So often the way teams function is they look at the immediate, what do we need to face and how do we do it and what do we do it? And so they end up in these conflicts, but they don't go through that and then revisit it. Mm-hmm. Say, how do we do that? Because they're busy and there's the next thing. And so it's seen as inefficient. And so we don't do things that are inefficient. So we're not going to go back and study what we did last time.
Right.
But doing team review like that actually is going to give you the best chance to be more efficient.
Or you need an incentive, right? That's aligning the incentives around your higher values.
And if you do that, you're actually going to increase efficiency of how you communicate and move through the outcomes of the next time around.
100%. Yeah.
But this is something that I think is missing from most of American corporate culture. I don't know about around the globe what happens. I don't see it. I haven't seen it in teams we've worked with. And this is something that I think needs to come up and needs to be adapted into American corporate culture, where you actually do team reviews, not just individual reviews.
Yeah.
So these are things that we're trying to advocate for and talk about when we're talking about the conflicts that can happen between the instincts, because we're advocating for different value systems, but as we talk about in future things coming up, at different stages, you absolutely cannot do without all of them.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please fire them at us. And what are you learning? What are you experiencing? How are you growing through your instincts? I think what Jim said earlier, even the trauma and what role, or the stress and what role it plays, in your life as it relates to your instincts. So yeah,
To be continued.
to be continued.
So thanks for listening. You can take the new Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers assessment on our website, theartofgrowth.org. That is our new instincts test. And you can order the Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers book on Amazon now. The link is in the show notes. Based on our interactions, we are also adding content to our Instagram about the topic, which is just Art of Growth. And the best way to support the show is to leave us a review wherever you listen and share this episode with someone else. We're hugely grateful for you doing this work with us. Grace and growth, my friends.